Um, Welcome, everybody, to the Community is Medicine webinar on the urgent need and many benefits of using a public health approach in communities to prevent and heal climate traumas. There were over 600 registrants for the webinar, and I'm sure more and more will join here as we go on, and some won't join because they know they can get the slides afterwards and they can't make it today. But the people who registered are from all over the US and many also from Canada, the UK, many other EU nations, South Africa, South Korea, Australia, and many from Asia and Africa, and we welcome you all. I'm going to begin in 1 second here, but I want to remind you, as Jesse just did, that if you have questions, post them in chat, because we can record chat and then we'll try to respond to the questions after the session is over and send them back when you get a copy of the slides that we'll use here. So, or you can just send questions to us directly at tr@trig-cli.org. We'll go over that again. So, I want to just give you a little background on the origins of this presentation. I coordinate the International Transformational Resilience Coalition. I always joke that it took about 50 emails back and forth to come up with that short, snappy name, but we did it for a reason, ITRC for short. We came together 10 years ago now. I used to direct the Climate Leadership Initiative at the University of Oregon. We were one of the first organizations in the country, going back almost 20 years, that helped local governments, state governments, and others, nonprofits, develop their first climate action plans. We actually went to Southeast Florida and organized the Southeast Florida Climate Resiliency Compact. So we were working on the East Coast and saw Superstorm Sandy hit the Northeast, hit the whole East Coast, and certainly the Northeast. We saw mental health problems and psychosocial problems really accelerate there. I'm actually trained in counseling psychology and in environmental science. So I saw those mental health impacts and knew how they were going to get far worse because the climate emergency were going to get far worse. And that's what led us in 2013 to start the ITRC, to organize the ITRC. We've been running conferences and workshops and training programs for a number of years. And then about 4 years ago, some of our members came to us and said, we've got to come up with a different approach to help prevent and heal the traumas generated by the climate emergency, because we just can't keep up with what's already happening. These were especially international members that were seeing more impacts than in the US initially. So we launched what we thought was going to be a 6-month research project with a bunch of grad students involved. Turned out to be 2.5-year research project, but it was fascinating. We looked all over the world, researched, talked to people all over the world, asking the question, is there an approach that can prevent and heal widespread mental health and psychosocial problems or traumas caused by relentless adversities? And it turns out there is an approach, and it's called a public health approach. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And when we got that information in mind, we launched a community of practice that have been doing that for the last 3 years, and been people from many nations involved. We're launching another one this February. I'll talk about that in a second. We also realized that these community groups needed funding to get going and strengthen their work. So we got the Community Mental Wellness and Resilience Act introduced in the US Congress. We'll talk about that in a second. And as we were doing this work and researching and talking to people, we got the question, is there a manual for how to organize and operate these community-based initiatives that use a public health approach to build population level mental wellness and resilience for the climate emergency? And that led me to publish the book, Preventing and Healing Climate Traumas, a guide to building resilience and hope in communities. And well, again, I'll talk about that in a second too. Excuse me. So let me start with the bad news. On top of many other traumatic stressors that people are experiencing today, we have to come to grips with the fact that we are in the midst of a rapidly accelerating climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe. And this catastrophe is already and will increasingly alter every aspect of society. I'm not using climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe just for sensationalization. First, we are experiencing an atmospheric climate problem, but we are also experiencing ecosystem dysfunctions and biodiversity loss at really catastrophic levels. They're all combined. And the word catastrophe is being used purposely, and I'm using it in how disaster sociology uses the term. In disaster sociology, emergencies are short-term events usually caused by a single factor that has limited geographic and social consequences. Disasters have a longer time frame and larger impacts, but are typically characterized as single events that end and give people time to recover. In contrast, catastrophes in disaster sociology are generally thought of as events that have multiple interacting impacts that are very substantial and widespread, that build on themselves and are cumulative, and often have many unforeseen, surprising consequences. And consequently, they're far more complicated, severe, and prolonged than emergencies and disasters. And most important, you don't respond to or try to manage a catastrophe in the same ways you do an emergency or disaster, because they're more complicated, severe, widespread, cumulative, and prolonged. What we've been mostly doing so far to respond to the climate crisis is to use standard previous approaches that we've used in the past to respond to single event disasters that end and give people time to recover. But the climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe is clearly different than that and requires a very different type of preparedness and response. Unless we think differently and respond differently, this catastrophe is going to create an epidemic of traumas, and we'll define that in a second. So we really have to proactively build population transformational resilience, and I'll define that in a few minutes. Not just treat individuals after they're traumatized or react to the next disaster, a hope that enhancing external physical resilience is going to be sufficient to prevent and heal these issues. So just the more distressing news, the most pervasive impacts are not the actual disasters we see per se. It's cascading disruptions to the social, ecological, and economic systems people rely on for basic needs, for food, water, shelter, jobs, incomes, health, etc. And as these cascading disruptions to these core systems continue to occur and accelerate in different times and ways, they'll emotionally distress everyone. So again, you can see what's already happening in many parts of the world and in North America and in Europe. Water, food, and other resource shortages or disruptions, job and income losses, new illnesses and diseases, involuntary migration, people being forced to move from where they lived and then moving into another community or nation that causes issues, heat and disaster triggered crime and aggression, violence, worrying about our future and our children's future, and many other surprising stress pileups. And those cascading disruptions and stresses are sometimes activated by, and other times accelerated by, more frequent, extreme, and prolonged disasters that traumatize millions of people. Disasters can directly traumatize 20 to 40% of those who are directly impacted, as well as 10 to 20% of the emergency responders involved, or those who know someone who is impacted, or even view the events from afar. And these are the wind, rain, and snowstorms, heat waves, wildfires, floods, droughts, et cetera, that we're seeing around the world. It's important to understand, again, that everybody will be impacted by what's happening over time. This is a population level problem, but in the near term, in different times, ways, and magnitudes, those at greatest risks are BIPOC residents, Black, Indigenous people of color, low-income populations, migrants, ethnic minorities, single women, young children, people living alone, the elderly, people with insecure housing, or those living in high-risk zones, people with pre-existing mental health conditions, and first responders. And climate impacts, again, I think all of you know this, are aggravating existing inequalities and injustices and adding new ones that create even greater impacts on many of these populations. But just something to be aware of, that if we only focus on the quote unquote vulnerable populations, this often allows wealthier people to think that their resources and their skills make them immune to the impacts. Oh, it's just a problem with some vulnerable populations. And since they don't hence have any need to cut their emissions or change anything, support policies that do that. So I think focusing in on a population level issue is much more accurate, first of all, and it also avoids this risk. Left unaddressed, the result is going to be a global epidemic of individual, community, and societal distresses and traumas. What do I mean by that? You all know this, what a psychological, emotional, and spiritual distress means. It's an understandable and normal response associated with the stressors and demands that are difficult to cope with, or that result from witnessing others in harmful situations, or the result from fantasizing about future impacts. Climate anxiety is one of these distresses. But it goes further than that, and that is just what we just talked about, individual trauma. We're seeing that widespread, and it can be defined as a blow to the psyche that breaks through one's defenses with such brutal forces that one cannot react to it effectively. And as so often happens in catastrophes, people withdraw into themselves. They feel numb, afraid, vulnerable, and very alone. That's the definition from Kai Erikson that I've always liked. It really builds a sense of loss of meaning, purpose, and hope in life is really at the root of many traumas. But it goes beyond individual traumas, and that's what we've mostly been focusing on so far, is the individual trauma, because community and societal traumas are also happening, but they're not well understood. A community trauma is an event or a series of events that create a blow to the basic tissue of social life that damages the bonds attaching people together and impairs their prevailing sense of community. It is the gradual realization that the community no longer exists as an effective source of support, and that an important part of the self has disappeared. Again, that's Kai Erikson. I live in Eugene, Oregon, and just not far from us, a couple of years back, the entire town of Blue River, Oregon burned down, creating a community trauma. Lahaina, Hawaii, burned down. That's a classic community trauma, but we're seeing that with many other kinds of disasters, but also human-caused disasters, widespread violence in a community, et cetera. And societal trauma goes beyond a specific geographic area or group with a shared identity to affect entire cultures, entire nations, or all of humanity. And the COVID-19 pandemic is a classic societal trauma, not just constrained to an individual or a community. Everybody experienced these impacts. And left unaddressed, the climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe will be the greatest societal trauma modern society has ever experienced. And I want to also emphasize that this is a quote by Brock Chisholm, the first director of the World Health Organization. There is no physical health without mental health. And what this means is comorbidity, as it's called, is very common. Adverse social, psychological, emotional, and behavioral conditions, that is, those traumas, often aggravate existing physical health problems or can directly produce new physical health problems, and vice versa. Physical health problems can affect and lead to mental health issues, but people in both fields, the mental health and physical health fields, often fail to recognize this or know what to do about it. And just as importantly, even more importantly, is that pervasive traumas can feed on themselves and create epidemics. That's because trauma becomes buried in our nervous systems. And when it's unaddressed and unreleased, it can cause people to deny what's happening, dissociate, that is, disconnect from what's going on in the world, blame others, attack others, self-sabotage. And what that happens is they try to anesthetize themselves with drugs, alcohol, eating, more consumerism, whatever it might be. Or they reenact the same behaviors that caused the trauma in the first place, the same actions, trying to work it out in their mind and just make things worse. And as seen time and again throughout history, when these reactions are occurring at a wide scale, as they are already doing in many, many nations, it can unravel families, groups, communities, and entire societies. And just as importantly is the continual activation of the emotional brain, the limbic system, meaning the activation that puts us into a fight, flight, freeze reaction to protect ourselves from what we perceive as threats that are caused by relentless stresses and traumas, are also blocking climate solutions. That people feel traumatized by many different issues going on in their lives now, stressed or traumatized, and it causes people to withdraw into a self-protective survival mode. They're into this fight, flight, or freeze reactions. And that means they oppose things that might seem threatening to them, including a change from fossil fuel vehicles to electric vehicles or any other kinds of issue. And so what we're seeing in our work is that often opposition to climate change is not necessarily a political or ideological reaction, a purely political or ideological reaction. It's often a reaction to things gone wrong in people's lives. When we understand that, that might give us a different way to begin to address these issues. And so I want to emphasize that there's no community resilience without addressing the human, psychosocial, spiritual aspects of resilience. Efforts to strengthen external physical resilience for climate impacts will have limited effects unless an equal or greater emphasis is placed on strengthening human, social, psychological, emotional, behavioral, and spiritual dimensions of resilience. And so far, we haven't done that. And to the extent that the external physical adaptation resilience occurs, it's very siloed from the human dimensions of it, and we really have to overcome that. And yet, at the same time, in the US and many other nations, mental health issues have been privatized. What do I mean by that? The dominant view is that the individual is responsible for their psychological, emotional, and behavioral struggles, and that the correct approach is to treat individuals mostly one at a time, only after they experience these kind of troubles. But if this is accurate, it's just the individual and we should treat them afterwards, how is it possible that mental health and psychosocial struggles have continued to grow in the US and many other nations to the extent that they're now epidemic? Just more people getting it individually through genetics or something? Excuse me. The reality is that climate traumas and most other traumas today result from interacting individual, family, social, economic, physical built, and ecological factors. This is called the social ecological model. There's lots of research about it. You can look it up on the web. But at the bottom, you see that, yes, the factors affecting individuals, their knowledge, skills, their childhood, their biology, their chemistry, their genetics, clearly affects their capacity for well-being. But what outside of that is their connections with family, friends, parents, social support networks, and the social norms and values in which they learn affect the individual. And outside of that is the community affects that interpersonal and individual factors. That is the conditions of their neighborhood, work places, schools, the groups they belong to, the religious and spiritual institutions. And outside of that, having tremendous effects on the previous three levels are structural factors, policies, institutions, power relationships, the types and levels of services involved. And all of that is influenced by environmental factors, the conditions of food and water, open space, green spaces, the physical built environment, housing, infrastructure, et cetera, economic systems and ecological systems. All of this interacts, and research shows that this dysfunction, the current dysfunction of these interacting multi-systemic factors, and they're multi-systemic because they're all there and they're all interacting, are creating widespread emotional distresses and traumas in the US and worldwide. And to address these multi-systemic factors, we've got to get out of our silos, the little niches we work in that we're trained to do and we've got funding to do, et cetera, and think systemically and respond holistically. But what we have seen in our work is if we take this path, the climate, ecosystem, biodiversity catastrophe can activate deep-seated, positive, constructive changes. So what that means is we've got to really proactively build population-level capacity for what we call transformational resilience. What do we mean by that? When suffering is caused by previously unseen external forces that have no endpoint, no resolution, or simple cure, and that is what the climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe is, the priority must be to help everyone develop the capacity to first buffer themselves from and push back against the traumatic stressors, and just as importantly, find constructive new sources of meaning, purpose, courage, and hope in life. Because what we are seeing, and I think if you think about it in the work you do, all of you on the line, that the climate ecosystem biodiversity crisis and catastrophe is really creating loss of meaning, purpose, and hope in life for many people. They can't see, they've lost their sense of meaning because it's hard to see if what they do makes any difference, and what they cherish in life makes a difference. And consequently, they lose hope. And when you lose hope, when you feel hopeless and helpless, what's the difference what you do? It really comes back to haunt you and everyone else. So transformational resilience means, the way we define it, is helping everyone strengthen their capacity for what we call presencing, or self-regulation and co-regulation. And that means to calm the body, mind, emotions, and behaviors in the midst of adversities. And also purposing, which is, in psychology, you could call adversity-based growth. And that is to use adversities to find new, powerful sources of meaning, purpose, hope, and courage in life. So presencing and purposing underlie all the work I'm going to describe here in a few minutes, and really is critical. You can call this whatever you want. That's what we call, to make it simple, presencing and purposing. Presencing means you come back to the present moment rather than worrying about the past, worrying about the future, and calm your body, minds, and emotion. Purposing is, what can I learn from this adversity? How can I find new purpose and meaning and hope in my life? And the combination of these two, we have found, really can help rebuild faith in the future. And the capacity for transformation and resilience is also shaped by interacting family, social, individual, economic, physical, built, and ecological factors. Those same factors we have to address to enhance the capacity for transformation and resilience. And enhancing these multi-systemic factors, addressing them, really requires that we work at the population level, which means actively engaging neighborhoods and communities. That's the best way to work at the population level to build transformational resilience. And this was reaffirmed to us by a comment from the noted pioneer clinical psychologist, Dr. George Albee, who said, "No epidemic has ever been resolved by paying attention to the treatment of the affected individual." Now, this is not a public health medical professor. This is a clinical psychologist who's also saying we can't address mental health epidemics by just paying attention to the treatment of the affected individual. And this key point led us in that when we were doing this research project to determine that addressing the population level multi-systemic traumatic forces requires that we expand our approach to mental wellness and mental health to prioritize a public health approach to mental wellness and resilience. So what does this mean? What is a public health approach to mental wellness and resilience? A public health approach takes a population level approach, not one that merely focuses on individuals with symptoms of pathology or high-risk groups, though they must be included in using strategies called proportionate universalism and life course approaches. You can look that up. I don't have time to go into depths on this, but our mantra has to be leave no one behind. And again, think about a public health approach for a pandemic. We wanted everyone to get a vaccine, not just those who might seem more vulnerable. Down the road, you might zero in on those, but everybody got a vaccine, or that was what was encouraged. And that's the same thing when we're trying to build mental wellness and resilience. It takes a population level approach. We must leave no one behind. Public health approach to mental wellness and resilience prioritizes preventing problems before they emerge, not merely reacting to or treating them after they appear. And it integrates community and group-minded healing methods into the prevention strategies. And I'll go into more depth of that in a few minutes. But we will always remember that prevention is the cure, not treatment, not trying to fix deficits in the communities, but prevention. And it does this, it accomplishes these goals by strengthening what are called protective factors, social support networks, resilience skills, local habits, local resources, and more that build and sustain healthy thinking and behaviors. Again, not just fixing deficits or treating individuals with symptoms of pathology. We want to continue to try to do that. That's going to be important, but we have to really build strengths, build social connections, and strengthen and build resources in communities. And the research shows that mental wellness and transformation resilience can be enhanced. You ought to look up the research from the National Prevention Science Coalition to save lives or to improve lives. They got a lot of research on these kind of issues. And that the most effective way to do this is to establish the horizontal social infrastructure in communities. That means the social infrastructure that crosses geographic, economic, racial, and other boundaries that are often called some version of a resilience coordinating network, or RCN. Sometimes it's a resilience task force, sometimes it's a board of directors, but you get the idea. And what it is it engages a broad and diverse array of local grassroots, neighborhood, and voluntary leaders, civic leaders, nonprofit, private, and public organizations that come together to jointly plan and implement multi-systemic strategies, that is, strategies to address all of those issues, all those factors I just talked about in the social ecological model, in order to strengthen as many drivers of individual and collective wellness and resilience as possible. So here's a sample ideal resilience coordinating network, and it's actually modeled after one in North Carolina, so it's pretty close to real. You see the inner circle there, around the inner circle, it might be faith, neighborhood leaders involved, private sector leaders, civic leaders, and going down to the right, youth leaders, public sector leaders, mental health and human services leaders, social workers, et cetera, nonprofits, faith leaders. They come together, they're the steering committee or the coordinating body. They might elect a co-chairs and an executive committee to make decisions on an ongoing basis. But they try to get a multi-systemic strategy together that builds mental wellness and resilience within everyone in their community. That is, all adults, all adolescents, and all young children. But outside of those, that ring is a whole bunch of what we call, resilience innovation teams that are working with different populations or different sectors. So again, upper right-hand corner, there might be one that's working with neighborhood innovation teams, or private sector working with the private sector innovation teams, youth innovation teams, going down to the left here, education innovation teams, public sector innovation teams, human services innovation teams, climate adaptation innovation teams, and community leader innovation teams. And these are just examples. There are others. Each of those is developing their own strategies, each of these innovation teams, to work with the populations they work with or the sectors they work with. But they come back and share what they're doing with the broader committee, the Resilience Coordinating Network. They share their strategies to get feedback. Oh, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? They also find out gaps in the populations being served. So, for example, they might the education innovation team might say, okay, here's our strategy. It's mostly focused on public schools. And then people might say, well, about 15% of the people in our community are getting homeschooled or in private school. Have you thought about how to assist them or engage them? And they go, oh, no, we haven't really done that. Also, they get a discussion going, and you can expand that. So you try to continually identify gaps in who's being served, and they coordinate fundraising strategies. Oh, two different groups are going to the same funder. Let's see if we can join together or maybe clearly differentiate the two proposals so you can both get funding, whatever it might be. So this is an ideal group. And as you look up on the top again, what you can call this is well-coordinated decentralization. using a ring team or a hub and spoke approach. And this is going on in many communities across the country. I'll share that in a few minutes. So why do we need enduring resilience coordinating networks? As you see on the right side, the answer is because the climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe is going to go on for decades. We have to get our heads around this. This is not just another environmental issue. This is a civilization-changing event that's going to go on the rest of our lives and our children's lives, and who knows how long. That's one reason. The second is most mental health and psychosocial problems surface months or longer after direct impacts occur, and I'll explain that in a second. And we therefore need to establish the social infrastructure needed to sustain community cohesion and build social efficacy for this long ongoing crisis. So over on the left side, you see the 6 common phases of disasters. This is pretty well known. There's lots of research on it. Over on the left side, we often get warnings, but not always, about a disaster. With the climate emergency, it's been 30, 40, 50 years. Actually, if you go back into the late 1800s, there was warning about it. And then you get impact. The impacts happen. And if it's a disaster, it can directly traumatize, as I said, 20 to 40% of those directly impacted and 10 to 20% of others. And as the impacts occur, the heroic phase takes place often. And that is people step forward, try to save others they don't know, or their friends and families. And really some just look like heroes. And then you enter what's called the community cohesion phase, or sometimes called the honeymoon phase, where people who don't know each other come together in their community or in their neighborhood to care for each other, provide food, water, shelter, give them health care, access to health care, et cetera. And that community cohesion phase we see just all the time. And that's usually what we focus on. Oh, see, we're going to take care of ourselves. And we do often, many times, in the short term, because after a few days or months, people have to go back and deal with their own lives. And the disillusionment stage begins when people are on their own now. They're not being supported by the community. And it can last months or years. And this is when most mental health and psychosocial problems emerge, because it can generate just widespread individual and collective social, psychological, emotional, and spiritual and behavioral struggles. And this, again, it can go on for years. Some people eventually remain dysregulated, but most can begin to recover. They go through the recovery phase. But again, it could be a long time unless they're impacted by other relentless stresses or another disaster, in which case they might regress back. And this is likely to often be the case with many folks as the climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe accelerates this regression that prevents healing. And so what we really want to do is we want to look at that community cohesion phase, and these resilience coordinating networks are a way to maintain that over the long run, to sustain that kind of community cohesion over the long run, so people are not on their own, left on their own devices and don't go through this disillusionment phase. We're going to have to help each other because the climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe is going to go on for a long time. So when we did our research, we really dug into what are different resilience programs doing to build resilience, to build transformational resilience. And we found 5 core areas that really are going to be needed, especially specifically for the climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe. If it's just an emergency or disaster, you might not need all these. But for this long-term civilization-altering event, we're just at the early stages of. This is really, at least these 5 are going to be needed. By far the most important is to build social connections across cultural, economic, geographic, and racial boundaries in the community or neighborhood. When I use the word community, I'm also talking about neighborhoods. And one way to think about this is to build bonding, bridging, and linking social support networks. Bonding networks are close connections with family, friends, and neighbors. They're called strong connections. Bridging networks are bridges between your bonding network, your close family, friends, and neighbors, and other close family, friends, and neighbors, other bonding networks. So you bridge that, and linking social support networks are connections between bonding and bridging networks that link those networks with people and organizations that have economic resources, political power, et cetera. They're all needed. Linking are often called weak ties. Bonding, again, are strong ties. Weak ties are just as important as strong ties. And because building these social connections is vital to address the toxic social isolation and loneliness that is generating profound mental health problems today all over the world. And family, friends, and neighbors are far more important than first responders during the first 3 to 5 days, and often much longer, of many disasters, especially when those disasters are mixed with ongoing toxic stresses generated by those cascading disruptions to the core systems we rely on for food, water, shelter, jobs, income, housing, et cetera. And just as importantly, social connections are especially important in times of crisis because they provide the emotional safety net and practical support needed to allow people to remain healthy and resilient. And what we have seen in the work we do is that doing this kind of work, building these social support networks, helps some people find meaning and purpose in their lives by assisting other people. So they might be not have that kind of meaning and purpose that makes them feel alive and gives them hope. But when they start making connections with others, they develop, they decide that this is going to be how I find meaning in my life and purpose. They start to assist others, and it builds hope within them and within others. Just as importantly, I'm going to read these in linear order, but they're actually all interconnected. Just as important is to engage the community or the neighborhood in ensuring a just transition by actively engaging residents in creating zero emission, climate resilient, physical, built, economic, and ecological conditions. And what a just transition means is that there's going to be impacts even in trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and build resiliency, but those impacts have to be shared equally among the community. The wealthier people just can't be immune to that. They have to share, and the benefits have to be shared equally across the community. That's what a just transition means. So this involves creating locally owned and operated businesses, healthy and safe public spaces, parks, et cetera, equitable and safe and affordable transportation infrastructure, restoring healthy forests and ecological systems, regenerating them, ample and safe housing, living wage jobs and incomes, et cetera. And the reason this is so important is because unhealthy conditions create mental health and psychosocial problems. The research is unequivocal about that. Go look at your community and see what happens when people live in unhealthy housing or don't have access to public spaces or good transportation. But at the same time, active engagement in creating healthier and just local conditions from the bottom up builds hope that enhances resilience and adaptability. Good example, I forgot to give examples of the previous one, but the Neighborhood Resiliency Initiative or project in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is doing great work. They find when they actively engage residents and actually helping others, it builds people's hope. When they see progress, it builds hope. And that's what enhances resilience and adaptability. And just as importantly, when we integrate external physical resilience work with human, social, psychological, and emotional resilience, when we connect the two, it really builds hope and helps people engage while also reducing local emissions, strengthening external physical adaptation, and often creating the social and political pressure needed for change. So most of the time engaging in these kind of activities we leave this to government or the private sector. The communities we work with and research show that no, when you actively engage residents directly in this work, not just asking for their opinion and then the private sector or government agencies go off and do it, you actually can build hope and resilience among folks. Third, what we've seen in a third core foundational area that's going to be really important as the climate emergency accelerates is to foster universal literacy about mental wellness and transformational resilience by helping everyone become trauma and resilience informed. This builds from health literacy. So this is mental wellness and transformational resilience literacy that's part of health literacy. And what it involves, it helping everyone understand how trauma and toxic stress can affect their body, mind, emotions, and behaviors, and how it affects groups. When they see groups reaching out and trying to attack others or whatever, understand that those are a bunch of traumatized people, and that's what those reactions are about. So that's what becoming trauma informed involves. And then you learn, teach everybody simple age and culturally appropriate presencing or self-regulation skills. There's many different kinds you can teach, and purposing or adversity-based growth skills. So helping everyone learn those skills is important. And when you do, it helps everyone understands what's happening within them and around them, which can normalize their struggles and reduce their fears of stigmatization and eliminate their stigmatization of others. Because, I'm going through the same thing. Now I get it. I understand what they're going through. And it also builds the knowledge and skills people need to prevent and heal their own psychosocial and spiritual struggles. And by spiritual struggles, I mean loss of hope, loss of spirit. And it, again, what we've seen is this motivates some people to find new meaning and purpose in their lives by helping others do the same. They're really going to start teaching this and helping others learn about this kind of work and teaching resilient skills, presencing and purposing resilient skills. The fourth area that we found that was going to be very vital for the climate catastrophe is to help residents regularly engage in specific practices that enhance mental wellness and transformational resilience. Laughing often in the midst of adversities is a real critical one. You just got to find something to laugh at. Practicing forgiveness for others who are responding with a fight, flight, freeze reaction. They're traumatized and therefore might be doing things that offend you or others. And you might be doing the same thing yourself. So forgiveness for others and forgiveness to you for yourself. We've got to help people keep learning so we're not stuck in with ideas and information and solutions that are no longer relevant for the conditions we're in. And to be grateful for what we do have and care for the body and find simple joys. Just a good example, there's a group up in Victoria, British Columbia, that where the neighborhood was distressed, they realized. So neighbors came together to create plays where the residents were the actors that made people laugh. And they found that this was really effective and great fun. So they put it into a little PDF file as to how to organize this. You can get it on their web. Here's a way to help everybody in your neighborhood and your community start laughing a bunch, even in the midst of distressing situations. There's lots of forgiveness campaigns going on. There's Be Grateful campaigns that some communities have formed. Lots of different ways to do that. And active engagement in these activities releases trauma from the nervous system. Laughing a lot really helps release the trauma, or singing even releases trauma, which helps prevent and heal traumas. While it also, engagement in these kind of activities tends to build social connections by engaging in pro-social activities with others. And it offering experiences, not just information, but experiences that can create emotional states that provide meaning in life during adversities is really important. And again, what we've seen is engaging in these kind of activities motivates some people to find meaning and purpose in their lives by helping others engage in this. The people who created the play and put it into a form that people could use on their own to laugh a lot, found meaning and purpose in that. It really helped them. And finally, the fifth foundational area we identified was to establish ongoing, mostly peer-led, resident-led, group and community-minded opportunities to heal traumas. So as you can see this circle up at the top, there's healing circles and other group methods. These are very powerful, helpful approaches where 5 to 100 people come together, facilitated by a peer. It's not a mental health condition necessarily. And they share the distress they experience. They hear from others experiencing something similar. They hear how people are dealing with it. They learn resilience skills while they're doing that work, and build social connections. And it really becomes powerful. With the somatic hearing, there's expressive therapies, there's mindfulness-based healing. Spiritual healing will be very important as the climate emergency accelerates. Nature-based and animal therapies, memorial events, and rituals in communities will also be very important. And you'll see it down on the right-hand corner. Mental health treatment is going to remain very important when it exists, for whom it exists. And as we know, most clinicians are in urban areas, wealthier urban areas, and even many of them will be traumatized or severely stressed as the climate emergency worsens. So we really have to expand the way we're addressing this to make sure that people have access to a lot of different opportunities, and they'll choose which one makes sense for them. Some people just won't go to a healing circle, but they might get involved with expressive therapies like art or drama or music. So you want to offer as many of these as you can and see which one resonate more. And again, these healing methods, these group and community-minded healing methods, really help normalize the struggles people are having, and help eliminate their fears of being stigmatized if people find out that they're struggling with this or seeking assistance. And while they also allow people to hear how others view their struggles and how they approach healing in very non-judgmental settings. Very powerful. And they build the emotional safety net that helps people release their trauma, begin to heal, and remain resilient and adaptable, while motivating some people to find new meaning and purpose in their own lives by being trained as peer facilitators to do this kind of work. So it can be very powerful. There's lots of great programs out there doing variations of this. The Visible Hands Collaborative is one that I think you all should look up. But there's Healing Circles International and many others also. Application of these 5 foundational areas really requires place-based, community-led initiatives that build widespread relationships horizontally to enhance voluntary interdependency. That is, you're dependent on others, but it's your choice, and helps all residents feel listened to, cared about, and thus they become willing to take ownership for the process. It's not, we call these community-led, not community-based initiatives. Both are important, but the more that the community leads it rather than a nonprofit or a government agency, the more residents will take ownership and help each other, and it can be sustained over the long term. Just a few examples of resilience coordinating networks in the US. North Carolina's Smart Start Healthy and Resilient Communities Initiative has over 40 different community or county-led initiatives focused on what they call 4 ACEs: adverse childhood experiences, adverse community experiences, adverse climate experiences, and atrocious cultural experiences. And I think what they mean by that is racism and other experiences. Virginia's Trauma-Informed Community Networks has 32 different networks building resilience to prevent and mitigate the impacts of trauma in their community. Peace for Tarpon was one of the first, if not the first, trauma-informed community in the US, doing great work. Robin Sanger founded it and directs it. The Community Resilience Initiative in Walla Walla, Washington is doing really great work. They started as a result of a program that the state of Washington first ran, that they no longer run, but they're really doing fabulous work. The Neighborhood Empowerment Program in San Francisco has done a lot of this work. Ran out of money, but it was really building resilience within youth. And there's many others described in the MARC program, Mobilizing the Action for Resilient Communities, that are focused on the Health Federation of Philadelphia. They were mostly focused on adverse childhood experiences, but there's a lot, and there's many others. These are just some examples. And there's many examples of international initiatives doing this kind of work. A community-based mental health and psychosocial support approach puts individuals, communities, and social systems at the center of the intervention in all phases of the response. That's these community-based MHPSS initiatives is really key, and that was by the Interagency Standing Committee and you can find more about that. Go to Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Networks, and you'll see many of these around the world. Only a few of these initiatives describe their work as a public health approach. Each is unique, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach. They designed to deal with the issues, demographics, et cetera, of their community. None addresses all 5 of the core foundational areas that I just described. Some are just doing one for now. And only a few are explicitly focused on the climate catastrophe. But they show how community is medicine. And if those not focused on the climate catastrophe expand to begin to build resilience to address it, and thousands of new community initiatives are launched around the world, we can build universal capacity for transformational resilience. So it's really important to begin to build the social infrastructure in communities now, given what we know is coming from the climate emergency. Although very well-intentioned, the mental health services offered to individuals only after symptoms appear, programs focused only on specific population in isolation or separately from others, and efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or address external physical risks by building physical resilience alone, they cannot build or sustain the population level capacity for transformational resilience we need for the decades-long climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe speeding our way. So we need to form resilience coordinating networks, whatever you want to call them, throughout the US and worldwide. We must organize and sustain the enduring horizontal social infrastructure in communities that is really needed to build and sustain transformational resilience for climate adversities, as residents also engage in urgently needed changes, including reducing greenhouse gas emissions, restoring ecological systems, building climate resilience, physical resilience, et cetera. So with this information in hand for the last 3 years has been my organization, in partnership with the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice, the American Public Health Association, and many others, has been running a community of practice on organizing and operating resilience coordinating networks. And a new community of practice is going to begin this February. And we welcome all of your involvement. You have to apply to attend, but if you are interested to apply, you can go to the ITRC website. And again, you'll get these slides afterwards, so you don't have to write this down too quickly. We welcome your involvement, and there are people from all over the world involved with our community practice. And later this year, we're going to announce a program to commission resilience coordinating networks. That is, we'll formally commission them saying, yeah, you've got the right makeup, you're doing the right work, and we'll help support you. But we also realize that new policies are needed to fund and support resilience coordinating networks, because when we did our research, we found that most of the programs and most of the community initiatives really struggled to get off the ground for lack of money, struggled to keep growing. Some would start and last a year or two, but without lack of funding to hire staff, they'd stop. So we worked with members of Congress to get the landmark bipartisan Community Mental Wellness and Resilience Act introduced in the US Congress. The original co-sponsors are Representative Paul Tonko and Brian Fitzpatrick. He's a Republican. Paul Tonko is a Democrat. And we now have 25 other co-sponsors, including 3 Republicans. So this is really a bipartisan bill. And it's also been introduced in the US Senate by Senator Ed Markey, a companion bill, and 3 co-sponsors. And the Community Mental Wellness and Resilience Act is endorsed by a growing list of 160 national, state, and local US organizations. And if you live in the US and support this bill, you can get more details about it, the specifics about it on the ITRC website. Please contact your House and Senate members and urge them to co-sponsor the legislation, push for a hearing on it, and enact it this Congress. And if you're interested in the letters, how do you write those letters to your member of Congress, you can go to our website. There's information on how to do that. But similar policies are needed in the US at the territorial, state, and local levels, and in all of the nations worldwide. And in the US, it's because the Community Mental Wellness and Resilience Act isn't going to fund all of the different community-led initiatives that are using a public health approach to build population mental wellness and resilience. States have to step forward, territories, local communities have to step forward and try to support and state and fund them. So I ask you to consider how you can work with your colleagues and local officials to design, introduce, and enact locally tailored legislation. And if you're interested in this, the ITRC website has model legislation that you can use. You look it up and you can just adapt the language to fit your community, your state, your nation in some way. So I want to just give a brief summary. The climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe is a civilization-altering event that over time, in different ways, times, and magnitudes, will stress and traumatize everyone. And solutions demand transformational changes in many aspects of society. One essential change that we have to make, among many, but one is to expand the way we prevent and heal mental health and psychosocial struggles to embrace a public health approach in communities. And this requires establishing the horizontal social infrastructure that actively engages residents in multi-systemic activities that build and sustain individual collective resilience for adversities from the bottom up. And if we do this, we can build population-level transformational resilience. As I said, when we started, we were doing this research, people kept asking, is there a manual for how to do this? And it came out, it's Preventing and Healing Climate Traumas, a guide to building resilience and hope in communities. You can get that on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, many other places. And back in 2016, I wrote a book called Transformation Resilience that you can also get. And we welcome you taking a look at that. So using a public health approach in communities shows how communities are medicine. If we do this right, if we organize people in the right way, get communities together and generate and organize community-led initiatives, we really can build population-level transformation resilience and find from that many transformational changes that are needed. So with that, I just want to close by saying we please consider applying to participate in the ITRC community practice. We will send you more information about that a few days from now, because you'll also get the recording of this video. Everybody who signed up will get it. We knew that only about a third of the people who register for something like this can attend, but everyone who registers will get the recording. And if you have questions, because there isn't time here, please post questions in chat, and we will try to respond to them in a document we send out afterwards in a couple of days with the video of the session. Or if that's not of interest, send them directly to us at trig-cli.org. And you can go to our website for a lot more information. You can see the website there, itrcoalition.org. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining today, and just encourage you all to think about how you can engage in those 5 foundational areas in your personal life, how you can help the organizations you work for, where you work, begin to organize a resilience coordinating network within the organization to build resilience, and how you can actually join with others in your community to organize a new resilience coordinating network and begin to build population level capacity for transformation resilience, or join an existing community resilience network that might be focused on adverse childhood experiences or community violence and other issues, and help them expand their work to also prepare people by building resilience for the adversities coming our way because of the climate ecosystem biodiversity catastrophe. So I want to encourage you to really think about how you can apply this information to your own life. These issues are going to need to become more and more important as time goes on. And we just wish you the best in doing that work. Let us know how we can help you, or if we can help you do that work. So thank you all for attending today. And with that, we'll end the webinar. Thank you all. Take care. Bye-bye.